Or equity. Very simple. Equity refers to fairness and justice, but that is not enough. Whereas equality just means providing the same to all, equity means recognizing that we do not all start from the same place and must acknowledge and make adjustments to the imbalances. The process is ongoing and requires us to identify and overcome intentional and unintentional barriers arising from bias or systemic structures. So because we are lawyers, and for lawyers to eat your food, you have to give them the law. So I'll give a constitutional basis before I move to my the gist of my discussion. The constitutional basis, a holistic approach of the right to health. As we know, Article 43 is about the right to health, and especially when we're talking about COVID, I'd like to talk about the right to this. Look at that, 43 2. A person shall not be denied emergency medical treatment, right? So the right to health has some segments which include availability, acceptability, and quality, but I'll want to look at accessibility the more, which is the economic affordability of health services, equality and non-discrimination in services. And I pose a question, is there a great injustice, so great than the denial of patients medical treatment in the midst of a pandemic just because they cannot raise the money? And we know very well the social contract. The role of the state has two duties: to protect life and property. And in the midst of a pandemic, if a state fails to provide this duty of protecting life, that is an abdication of its core duty. I'll just move to a few cases which pronounce the right to health as a part of the right to life. So the right to health and life are all interrelated. In the case of PAO and others versus the Attorney General, that is the Kenyan case, the court held that the fundamental right to life, human dignity, and health as protected and envisaged by Article 26, 28, and 43 of the Constitution encompasses access to affordable and essential drugs and medicines. Now I'll move to the Supreme Court of India. I am doing the Supreme Court of India because it is also a developing nation like us, and so this mostly informs our work as lawyers. In the case of Bandua Mukti Morcha versus the Union of India, the Supreme Court linked the right to health to the right to life, and then the state of Punjab and others versus Mohinder Singh Chawla, the apex court reaffirmed that the right to health is fundamental to the right to life and should be put on record that the government has a constitutional obligation to provide health services. Now, there's another picture, and these photos are going to form really my discussion. What's the difference between equality and equity? When we look at the 14th Amendment of the Constitution of the United States, we have the concept of equal protection. And that is the same principle that is in the Article 14 of the Indian Constitution, which is also held in our Constitution, Article 27. So we have the right to equality, and then we have the right to equal protection. Under equal protection, we have the principle of equity, which means equals among equals. I remember my constitutional law professor, Professor Naresh, always emphasized on this, that equal protection means similar conditions and similar circumstances. Equals among equal. Then I'll refer to this case of John Kabui Mwai and others versus the National Examination Council and others. This is what the case, the court pronounced itself saying the Constitution's transformative agenda looks beyond merely guaranteeing abstract equality. All right? The abstract equality of if we are 10, everyone receives a shilling. There is a commitment to transform Kenya from a society based on socio-economic deprivation to one based on equal and equitable distribution of resource. Then I'll shift to the courts in India. In the St. Stephen's College, University of Delhi, the court held that equal protection of the laws is now being read as a positive obligation on the states to ensure equal protection of laws by bringing in necessary social and economic changes so that everyone may enjoy equal protection of the laws and nobody is denied such protection. If the state leaves the existing inequalities untouched by its laws, it fails in its duty of providing equal protection to all persons. Now, having done the legal mambo jumbo, I'll move to the financial aspect. During the pandemic, contextualizing the financial situation. In fact, before I do that, let me go to the quantifying poverty in Kenya. If we look at the World Bank statistics in 2016, it was established that 35.5% of Kenya's population was living below the poverty line. That was in 2016, which is before the pandemic, 4 years, I think. And so people were living, this 35% live with below $1 a day. All right? So we have the context that 5% of people are poor and they don't really have money, and that's before the pandemic. And so when the pandemic hit, we can imagine what happened. And I think it could have been up to 50%. All right? So let's move to during the pandemic. We can look at what happened during the pandemic. One, we had the containment measures, which led to uncertainty surrounding the COVID, and which led to the closure of business. Most private and numerous public entities laid off their employees, especially hotels and the tourism sector, and even lecturers of Egerton, which I remember very well, they were slashed 40% of their salary, which I don't know up to now whether they have gotten it. And many Kenyans lost their jobs. That was during the pandemic. And I've quantified the poverty. Right. Now, I'll look at the cost of COVID treatment. So let's evaluate the cost of COVID treatment. All right. So it has been established that private hospitals demand, so you know very well that from last year up to this year, beginning of this year, the government was supporting COVID treatment. And then around April, March there, the government said it will no longer support COVID treatment. Now Kenyans have to foot their own bill. And then after that, we have private hospitals, just been established that private hospitals ask a deposit before admitting a patient of a deposit of up to 600,000 shillings. And then public hospitals, this is Kenyatta Hospital, it was demanding a deposit of, even now I think, of 200,000 before they admit a COVID patient. And we have a research that was done by even our CAS of health, Masi Mwangangi doctor. It was established that in a day, people with moderate COVID spend, apart from the deposit, 7,000. Those people with high cases of intensive care in the ICU, they spend up to 63,000 a day. And you know now, half of our population almost is living under $1 a day. Now, is this a death sentence? Or is it God for us all and everyone for himself? So D, I will look at the effects or consequences of out-of-pocket payments on patients and their families. You can just leave the video, it's okay. You can pause it. Out-of-pocket payment, what is the effect on patients and the families? We have results which have shown that the incidence of catastrophic payment is more severe for the poorest households in the rural areas and mainly due to outpatient services. So results have shown that the effect of out-of-pocket payments leads to the proportion of poor people increasing by 2.2% annually. So, which means that between 1 million and 1.1 million people are pushed into poverty every year due to out-of-pocket payments. And so 453,000 Kenyans, how many minutes? Give me some time. So they are pushed into, we've seen that annually we have 1 million being pushed into poverty. And now, having seen all that, we see that the only way we can survive, or especially the indigent or the vulnerable population in Kenya, the only way forward is for them to access a robust health insurance. And so I'm going to, in a nutshell, I'm going to look at the challenges or the problems facing the health insurance that we have, which is majorly NHIF, which is one, we have a low uptake of our insurance in Kenya. It's only 20% of Kenyans have a health cover, only 20%, which is only 8 million. And so if you ask an actuary, this is unsustainable. Even the 8 billion contributors are not able to sustain the fund. Another one, the question about equity has been raised regarding NHIF because you find people who earn different amount of money contribute the same amount to NHIF. So the question arises about the question of equity that I've raised here. Then there is a next issue is lack of transparency with NHIF. So this is a quote from an NGO that I'll just quote. NHIF cannot be the same person who is collecting money and at the same time utilizing the money. NHIF single-handedly collects premiums from Kenyans and spends without outside checks and balances. Then Jumadan is even better. He says that NHIF is not minimally transparent and it does not disclose how it invests the money it retains and where the profits go. And then there's mismanagement. At the same time, NHIF is very inefficient, spending too much money on administration, but the most contentious question is, this animal we are giving money, how efficient is this animal? All right? Another problem is non-remittance of NHIF deductions, which is common especially among public universities, which are struggling with debts they have never remitted. In fact, I was told this during the Masai conference, that this is a major problem with NHIF. The employers don't remit funds. The next thing is the parastatal culture of appointment in Kenya. Every president who comes in, the person who is in power, what he does is he appoints his political friends to state corporations or parastatals. One of them is NHIF. And they just go there to mint money instead of having a professional way. And the last one, and which is very important point, the problem of NHIF, it is KEMSA. You know, all these are state organs or corporations. The role of KEMSA is to ensure their equipment or medicines at a cheap cost. So when we have expensive medicines or equipment from KEMSA, it means NHIF will also have to pay a high cost of funds to the hospitals for treatment. Solutions that I've suggested. So these solutions are, and I will need you to question my solutions because some of them are radical. One of them is there's a need to appoint managers on a competitive basis. Another thing is appointment of fund managers. Fund managers like those in charge of mutual funds to invest these funds that we get for NHIF properly, so that we can have the funds maximally used and invested very well. And then another thing, this one, NHIF should be made mandatory to all Kenyans so that it can be sustainable, because the 8 million out of 40 million is not sustainable. Another one is high fines for employers who don't remit contributions. The next is Kenyans to pay a monthly or annual contribution which is proportional to their earning. And then NHIF to disclose publicly a quarterly report of its collections, investments, and payments. Another one is, this one especially for us lawyers, we should lobby and do advocacy. Opinion makers, the NGOs, civil society, should lobby and advocate so that we can do one thing to ensure we all have a robust health insurance. Like yesterday, Wamachangi, the senator of Kiambu, was speaking, and he was saying the most of the money that his constituents ask him is money for wagonjwa. Mtoto wangu ni mgonjwa, nyanya yangu ni mgonjwa, mamangu ni mgonjwa. And then, if you can tell these politicians that once you get in power, ensure we have a universal health coverage that is robust, so that usisumbuliwe, so that they can do that. So we need to lobby and advocate. And then judicial activism and public interest litigations, they are a way forward, especially for us lawyers, so that we can move the government to act with haste, so that they can avail the Kenyans with a universal health coverage, a proper health insurance for the indigent and the vulnerable. Otherwise, when the next pandemic sets in, it will always be God for us all and everyone for himself. Thank you all.
Good afternoon. Today I'm not using the powder pen. I'll be obedient and compliant. Okay. When we want to build an economy that is ravaged, we know the person who is most affected is usually the poor, the marginalized, and the vulnerable. And even before the pandemic emerged, we've always had these people. They're existing. It's not that there's nothing for them. There is, but because of the crises, the problem has been heightened. And so I was taking this opportunity to check how COVID pandemic has either made the life of these vulnerable people better or worse. But you can guess, can only be worse. Okay, so social protection, I discussed about social protection because it's the only avenue through government is able to provide for citizens or cushion them when there's a disaster or there's a crisis. Or even not when there is a crisis, but when they themselves are unable to take care of themselves because of their social, economic status. And this includes both men, women, and the intersex, as I was rightly informed by Ruth, my Nancy. Okay, now I think I'm going to leave the introduction because we know what COVID has done. But the key thing that I want us to understand that social protection are strategies that are used or more concerned about preventing, managing, and overcoming crisis situations or disasters, and purposely to ensure the well-being of the citizens are not highly affected, or their problems are not as heightened, or made more difficult in comparison to the life they had before the crisis. So this paper I've divided into 4 portions, actually 5. One, I have a conceptual framework, which I'm not going to delve into, but I think we've not talked about human rights-based approaches, so I'm going to talk about that one. This one, I am adopting human rights-based approach for one reason. Human rights-based approach, and I'm glad UNDP is here. They're the ones who keep talking about human rights-based approach, human rights-based approach. That should be involved in programming, in design, implementation, and the rest. So human rights-based approach is usually people-centered, and it is anchored in 5 pillars. That of participation, accountability, non-discrimination, and equality, and also empowerment, as well as the legality of the action that you want to undertake. And why do we insist on having on using human-based rights approach? It is because the focus for human rights-based approach is more focused on people who are vulnerable, marginalized, and very poor, that when we start development agendas, their voices, or needs are seldom met in the process of designing, implementing, and even when you do evaluation of things that you want to implement for their benefit. And then I also look at the social protection in terms of its efficacy, in terms of the strategies that were adopted in Kenya, and those that were just only introduced because of COVID. And then I also look at comparative study, which take United Kingdom and Australia to draw on the best practices that we can adopt and implement for the benefit of our citizens. Now, social protection is a human right that is guaranteed under international law and also in our national laws. And because it is a human rights issue, it means, therefore, it falls within the normative framework that obligates state parties to ensure that they are realized, through implementation within their domestic arena for the benefit of the citizenry. But as to whether this obligation is met or not is debatable, because because social protection falls under socioeconomic rights, countries are always very shy in protecting them. And even if they do, it is always half-hearted. We do not push to the level where we demand for rights like those of civil and political rights. But nevertheless, they're still under an obligation. So you'll find it under the UDHR, I will not go into details to tell you what it is. It is in the papers because in the interest of time. And then, of course, if you look at the ILO, that is the mother of all labor relations, you look at ILO Convention number 168, it talks about social protection. And also, in terms of social development goals, SDG, Goal 8 talks about promotion of inclusive and sustainable economic growth through employment and decent work for all. You cannot have a decent work if you do not have, if your government, is not making sufficient protection for you in case of difficulties in your employment, whether contributory or non-contributory. And then also in Kenya, the social issues to do with the social security or social protection are anchored in our constitution under Article 43 of the Constitution, 43.3, and then of course Occupational and Safety Act and the Employment Act of 2007. And I'll bring in Employment Act because you'll remember the case for the earliest case that was brought about when people were being laid off because of the adversities created was touching on this one. If you look at Employment Act Section 10, it talks about when an employer wants to vary terms of employment, it cannot be done unilaterally. You have to have some consensus around it, and that means a lot of consultations with your employees, regardless of the situation. So where a situation like COVID presented itself, it presented difficulties to the court in terms of interpreting that section. So the court had to be more strategic and ensure that there was some kind of a balance and look at which is the lesser evil, to enforce strictly the interpretation, or can we have a middle ground so that each party is left happy and work can continue. Then social protection in Kenya is under the Ministry of Labor. I will also not go into details, and they are in form of contributory and non-contributory. She works in that department where some of the activities are done. For instance, how many of us have family members who are benefiting from this program called Inua Jamii? You don't know about it, but there's because you have old mothers, you have widows in your villages, you have old men, and you've not heard about it. Okay. Now, this Inua Jamii, it is meant for people who are out of work and they have no income. And so for government to ensure that they have a decent living, so that they're not subjected to early death, there's some little financial provision that is given by government. It's never sufficient, but at least it is something. They cannot pick it even if you have to walk from here to Mombasa, So it is something to be happy about, however little. Then we also have the cash transfers that are given to orphans and vulnerable children. Then also people with disability. Then there's the Hunger Safety Net, which is a program run in Turkana. Those who are coming from Turkana, you must be familiar with what is going on there. Now, because of pandemic, I have a long statistics looking at the global, sub-Saharan Africa, and then I come to the region, East Africa, and then to Kenya. And how you see the graph, a comparison just before COVID, and then during COVID, up to how many months? Up to 2 months ago, when I worked on this paper. Okay, but just globally, 33 million people, lost their jobs, and unemployment therefore brought its ugly, feature into mankind. We all know that when there's unemployment, it means there's no income. When there's no income, in context of access to justice, especially for the vulnerable. I have been sacked by my employer. I have no income. Or if I'm being given a little money by what the Kenyan government gives like 2,000 shillings. Would I prioritize my going to access justice through an advocate? Or I'll value what I'm going to eat and live for the next day? Which is easier? And if then the process continues, then of course you're creating a country which is not cohesive and can be prone to more crises, high rates of crime, and then therefore also means that more problems, or more injustices to many. I think the case for, sorry. I don't know where you are. Okay, then I was telling you about I'm not going to go back over the case of Kamau and the signature holdings. I've explained. Then the adverse working conditions I'm also going to skip, but I think as we talk here, it's not about just getting income when you talk about social protection. Protection of workers during COVID pandemic was such a challenge for health professionals. We are faced with a disease that we do not know, but we are still nevertheless expected to work. No sufficient protection, or provision was made for the health professionals, particularly when we know that we are dealing with a dangerous disease, but you are still exposing your citizens who are giving the service, you know. And then, are we also not concerned about their social well-being? How well can we be prepared to ensure that even as we face crises, what kind of protection do you give to the workers, whether crisis or no crisis? In Kenya, there's usually no proper social security because people like I talked about some outsourced workers, sometimes or the casual laborers, they do a day-to-day work, So if the work is stopped, it means their income is not there for the following day. It means sometimes they will go without food for a longer period because the lifeline or the river source has been blocked from somewhere. So you even expose these people more, and yet we talk of social protection being a right that is guaranteed in the normative framework, both nationally and internationally. Um, During COVID-19 period, we had the cash transfers program, and some of the little measures which were also introduced, remember, for people what were earning lesser income. You remember the president directed that KRA exempts them from tax. Because you're not in that category, you may not remember, and maybe it may not have been a concern to you, but it was something so good to them because at least they're able to take a little extra, from the tax that had been that had been that they had been exempted from paying. And then there's also the Inua Jamii cash, which I've already mentioned. And you remember the CRB? Remember the CRB, not directly related to social protection, but it was a measure that was meant to cushion people, So people were given a reprieve for a certain period to enable them to reorganize their finances that had been made, disorganized by the COVID pandemic. And then kazi mtaani, this one is a program that has been introduced by government to cushion the youth that are unemployed. But Mary will tell us here the efficacy of that program. Because I know they wake up very early in the morning, and I don't know if the money is paid on time, and even if it is paid on time, how often it is paid. But at least there's an initiation, there's an initiative by government, taking recognition that they have a duty to play for their youth and for the population that is unemployed to cushion them and prevent them from getting into crime. Okay, now from my analysis, from what my different discussions and looking at the programs with the microscopic eye, I just know that these programs are not sufficient. They're so inadequate, and even processing them, even getting someone to access them is so difficult. Some of them require registration. You have to have an ID, and you must have been registered in an existing program, We all know that in Kenya, there are so many places that are inaccessible. And even as 2021, 2nd December, there are Kenyans who are over 18 years, they don't have ID. There are Kenyans who are very old who need this assistance, 80 plus, 90 plus, you know, and they cannot benefit from this because they do not have IDs. Do we need to peg IDs on them? Can we use the chiefs or whoever, the next or immediate leader around there to help government to trace these people and give the help that is needed? I don't know if it can be open to abuse through that, but just know that these programs require registration. And you know the challenges of registration in Kenya. You might think it's so easy because you're living in town, but people who are living in the rural areas that really need social protection. Oh, I've not even, okay. How many minutes? Okay. All right. All I need to tell you is that our social protection is very weak, and we need to strengthen it to ensure that the citizens benefit from it. And we do not need to wait for a disaster to start preparing for it or to start thinking so hard, you know, to make our citizens realize their rights that we ourselves know is guaranteed in the Constitution, and therefore then becomes mandatory for government to implement. We cannot wait anymore because our right, once it is there, even though we have responsibility, we must enjoy them. And so, thank you. I said I will comply today.
Thank you, Dr. Aura, and also thank you to all the presenters. I'd like to believe we've had a diverse collection of topics that had us thinking and looking at COVID-19 from different angles. So mine is to midwife the process, and therefore I open the floor to questions. I will call upon the guys who are helping with the microphones to please assist us. So if you have a question, put your hand up, and then of course the microphone will be brought to you. Please be clear who you're directing the question to so that they can note it down and then they respond. We shall have a first round of questions, after which we get responses and then another round. I believe we shall start at the back and proceed towards our right.
Yes, thank you for all the presenters. My comment is directed to Ms. Wangare, the one who was talking about environment, human rights, and COVID-19. That's my PhD topic. So yes, I was very, very excited. So I just want to say that, Ms. Wangare, you also need to focus on the anthropogenic drivers of COVID-19 because they're all related to climate change, and that you need to let the link come out clearly and not just have it superficially, because now you will lose the nitty-gritties of this link. And also, there is the UNEP ILRI report of 2020, which also specifically talks about climate change and COVID-19 and human rights. Yes, thank you.
And just as a lecturer, to congratulate all the students. I was very impressed by the quality of work. So let's give a round of applause to all the students. Thank you.
Actually, that is also what I wanted to say. So apart from congratulating the students, I would like to congratulate the dean and the staff at the Faculty of Law. Last year we had only one student. This year, together with the one we had last year, we have 5. So this is good. I think by the time we are getting to next year's conference, we will have more and more. And like Susan, I was also very excited about the presentation on climate change because I also have lots of interest in climate change. I wish I had known this about last month. I organized a webinar on climate change. This is good. Maybe we need to encourage you to attend next year's COP27, We have heard that it may be in Egypt. So if you start lobbying early enough with Dean here, Wahoo, you may find yourself in Egypt at the COP26. But congratulations, and I hope to see more of this next year. Asante.
Thank you. Just a comment in regard to the internship program, and because I know the big guys who can influence are also here, the senior councils, and I believe like the likes of Professor Mbote who will be coming tomorrow. I think it's good to listen to the appeal of the interns, and the Public Service Commission currently is having a very elaborate internship program for graduates in like social sciences. You graduate with a sociology, with public administration, with general degrees. So why not also in law, which is a profession? Why not maybe the Kenya School of Law or Judiciary just come up with like an internship program for just 1 year? And then the students will be cautioned because there is a standard stipend for the interns so that they don't wasiumie sana. Anyway, that was an appeal for them, and as an administrator, it's always good to listen to them. Thank you.
Chair, can I also react a bit?
Yes,
Yes.
Mr. Egerton.
Yeah, on the issue of interns, I will speak this with all due respect. If a student comes, or if a person comes to the office as an intern, let him or her come as an intern. We have had, I'm speaking this out of experience. An intern comes, we sit down, we agree, you are not entitled, or is not entitled to a salary. But I'm going to give you something small to keep you going, to keep you coming here. The intern stays for a few days. Says, in X's law firm, they paid 20,000. You are giving me 5,000. I have to go. So you have to let the intern go. The other issues there is, you know, you are the one to know how I'll pay my rent, how I will pay my transport to the office, how I take my lunch. Whose responsibility is that? Is this a person who has come to learn? In fact, there was a proposal at one point in time that the interns in the law firms, they need to pay the lawyers because they're being trained. Whether they would accept it or they don't accept it, well, but that didn't work. It never saw the light of the day, but it was there. And then we were being asked by Kenya School of Law, which was very powerful at the time, that we contribute to the training of lawyers, right, at the Kenya School of Law. Well, it didn't work. It was objected to. Because when you look at also the law firms, you know, we may be equal in the perspective of human rights, but in terms of economics, we may not be equal. I can have one case and I stop going to court for 10 years. But somebody can have 1,000 cases, right? But he's not even able to pay rent. So those considerations also come into play. And the other issue that I would comment on my colleagues here about NHIF, Mr. Shem. I like your analysis of NHIF, but I would have wished to hear from you. What would you say about the military takeover of KEMSA? Now, takeover in quotes. And secondly, you have mentioned that those who don't remit statutory deductions, in particular NHIF, they should be faced with heavy fines. I would agree with you, but let's go to the reality on the ground. We have a public institution which is funded by the exchequer, right? For example, we can take public universities. Universities who are being told, okay, let's take X as a university. The capitation of University X was 4 billion every year. Then they were told, we are establishing new universities. So we have to reduce your capitation to 3 billion. So the university lost 1 billion. Now, to meet the budget for that institution, which is funded by the exchequer, right? Statutory deductions, the salaries are not sufficient. The deductions are never remitted, NHIF being one of them. Impose a penalty on that institution. Who pays? And where does the money come from? Why would a government create an institution which again, right, it is killing using one hand? I think about it. The mandatory contributions of NHIF, fine, we can have mandatory contributions, but look at those who are not working. How will they contribute? Or did you exclude them from those who will get, right, the services of NHIF? And I wish you could have gone also talked about what happens inside NHIF. There is so much that some of us don't know. I applied to go for medical treatment in India. My application is rejected. Shame applies. The same committee which sits approves and it says NHIF will pay your bill fully. If you talk to the general public, you'll find so many people who have had that experience and they have severely suffered. So there is much more probably you would have commented. And finally, on my students, when we have people who are undergoing trial, we call them suspects or accused persons. We don't call them criminals. Thank you.
Thank you. Bob, you deserve a job and you deserve to be paid well. I have no doubt. Compared to what our senior says, I don't agree even one bit. If somebody is making money out of you, they ought to pay you. My only issue is this, Bob. What becomes the obligations of the intern in this sense? So, for example, in a law firm, the indemnity cover that the law firm takes will not cover work that the intern has done, right? And maybe that is one of the worries that employers have, that if they give you more duties, hence giving you more money, and in the event of a liability, then that cannot be taken out of you. And so I don't know what you think, but maybe we need to regulate in terms of indemnity on the intern's work in case of liability for what they do. But no doubt interns need to do well, because I saw the stories at the start of this year of pupils who are being forced by pupil masters to cook ugali and fish for them every lunch. Yes, in a law firm. No, it's true. Yeah, the interns were saying it. The pupil master requires you to cook brown ugali for them. And that is not training. You come out with more muscle than brain. And then on climate change and COVID-19, considering we don't see this end of the pandemic, Wangari, how do we deal with intergenerational, equity of handling climate change in terms of the pandemic? How we really don't know whether the intergenerational equity itself works, but you see, if we can't see at the end of where or what we expect in terms of the pandemic, then how do we deal with the next generation in terms of protecting it then going forward?
Okay, thank you so much for the presentations. They were very nice. I'll just comment briefly on the paper that was presented by Mutembei and Ms. Mosau. They touched on public finance, something which is very near and dear to me, because the nexus of corruption and human rights is quite big. So when they talked about having the government having strained finances because of the pandemic, well, that could be true, that sometimes, business went down, but at the same time, we are aware that there was billions trickling in from development partners, from governments, from well-wishers, billions. At the same time, we have people being reported as COVID billionaires. So do they apply their mind to the fact that whilst there was an economic strain, perhaps pressure on the government, there were these multiple streams of money coming in, which up to now have not been accounted for? And what would that mean when we talk about access to justice being impossible by virtue of the pandemic? Is it really a true reflection of the facts on the ground? Thank you.
Mine is very simple. To the young brothers and sisters who presented and are still learning, there is a Twi phrase. The Twi, an ethnic group from Ghana, the Fante Twi and the Ashanti Twi, they talk of the term Ankobia. Ankobia means those who are in the vanguard, those who are leading the struggle, the battle. I want to properly thank you for what you're doing. Continue writing, continue reading, continue being innovative. Bob, I think I taught you international law, and you also got some mercantile and commerce lessons from that. Thank you very much. Continue with your course. Wagui, thank you very. It's Wagare. Wagare, thank you very much. It's a bold spirit. The consciousness you have with the environmental costs and the question you have with the whole climate change paradigm is quite impressive. Keep at it. Keep focus at it. You clearly have it right. How I wish that your voice and the voice of others could be heard. Moirore, is Moirore who presented? Moirore, I am keen to be educated by you. I heard you say something that's quite alarming, and if you have the evidence, I think you can channel it to us and we can talk to my people at LSK. Where was this that police officers forcing people to make confessions, and if these confessions were made, were they accepted in court? Have these people been represented? Because that's a dangerous one. The law on confession is express, and it has been reiterated by the High Court, I think, as late as a month ago, that confession has to be made according to the law. Otherwise, thank you very much.
Any more questions? The gentleman next to Amos, you had a question, sir? Yes, yes. Please pass the mic to.
Good afternoon. I must also join calls with Gada to say I was really delighted to hear the presentations today. And to my brother Shem, there's a question I've been battling for quite a while. In the context of NHIF and other socioeconomic affairs, maybe you can assist me as you explore. Can we really achieve equality of outcomes, or we can only have equality of opportunity? Can we really achieve equality of outcome, or we can only have equality of opportunity? We've seen in Nordic countries where the insistence of achieving equality of outcomes makes the gap even further between what the good senior says. One person has an approval, and it is usually based on the influence that they have on the board, not really on merit. And the other person is denied flat out, which has happened to some people I know. So maybe as a practitioner of law, Bob, I'm sorry, this profession is challenging, it's difficult. When you come to practice, you realize not all people are the same. But I will tell you what Barack said, people don't really care where you come from. The business interests come first. If I can pay you, that is a personal attribute. Some lawyers do actually pay well, they treat you well, but some don't care, and that is the nature of business. Even the richest man on earth has complaints from Amazon employees, and he can afford to pay them generous bonuses. What about that lawyer who has 10 girlfriends and 2 Mercedes-Benz which are on loan from NCBA Bank? So you'll have a challenge there, but the good thing is with time, and we have avenues of growth. We have digital opportunities we as practitioners are seeing. Ogada can tell you the people who are there in the BBI case were mostly young people who battled seniors who had been paid millions. So there is still hope in the profession, despite the 5,000, 10,000 that you're earning. Maybe as a last question to Wangari, am I pronouncing it really properly? Or I'm talking too much? I've asked, there is an alarm that is being presented by environmentalists which I'm yet to understand. Is the world coming to an end soon?
Thank you. I have a question and a comment, but first, as a lecturer, I'm very, very proud of the students. There's nothing as good as seeing, results, and the results are good. Amos, you suggested that a proposal to establish desks at police stations for victims, equivalent to what we have for children, I guess, and gender. So I was wondering whether your expectation is that a victim, you probably think a victim is likely to go to a police station. I could like to understand your reasoning on that. And two is a general comment to the students, particularly the one who introduced, who talked about internship. As one of you has already said, internship and pay and trusting the process are very important. Most of these senior people here, if they were to share their stories, they reveal that the journey is not as plain as it appears. You will be treated well and you will be mistreated in the workforce. And the early you accept to run through the process, the better. This is just a general comment, because out here, things are tough. You get, and by the way, lawyers are generally known to be one of the most hopeless employers. So you're gonna deal with people who are very evil in nature, and yet you've no choice. You have no choice other than to know how to navigate these waters. I have been an intern myself, and I learned that time is like bananas. You cannot ripen bananas through machines. You just have to accept. Number one, I'm an intern. I know nothing, even if you know so much. Two, and when you are given an opportunity, you need to appreciate your position. Appreciating your position in life is very important. In the strata of life in this employment, where do you belong? You may look very intelligent. You may feel very smart. But the moment you understand that you are the lowest strata and accept, then work as you raise up, it will really help you go places. No boss wants challenges. In fact, I was taught by someone I don't want to mention, when you are with your bosses, humble yourself. Even if you are so smart, because you are, you must always make your boss look smarter, even though you know your boss is hopeless. Because it is your boss that will lift you. It is your boss that will take you places. It's not you. You have absolutely no power to take yourself somewhere. If you had, you could not be where you are. You understand? Eh? So I think our youths need to be taken through some short courses, because I also see new employers, they come to a job Within 2 months, they resign, they quit. When you ask the reason, you just realize they were not prepared, despite the smartness. So I think this trust in the process has trained me that with the time, there are things you just learn, not because you were never taught, but because you served your term and you did it faithfully. Thank you.
All right. I think, Shem, do you have a question or you have? Okay, just a moment. Patience, please. Yeah. So I think we shall start with Aaron at the back. If you want to respond to any of the questions that were directed towards you.
Okay, so I'd like to first say that my presentation was not intended as a disruptor or an attack to the status quo, but to everyone. First of all, I'd like to mention that it is illegal to make a person work without pay in the USA. It is illegal.
In Kenya.
So you are perpetrating illegalities. That is one. Secondly, I think people need to appreciate internship and apprenticeship are two very different things. An apprentice is a person who will sit and observe and watch and learn from you. An intern is a person who does. You show and they do. And from all of the people who've been in the practices here, or those of us who've owned practices, those of you rather, you do earn money from the work of your interns. Whether it is that fuel you stop, because we have had cases and we do know the magistrate can help us here. Eh? There are cases where there are pupil masters, for instance, who don't care whether or not you're an advocate. They say, I have a case, go to Milimani, make sure the brief is held. People have been locked up by magistrates, by judges for impersonating advocates because that is the extent of exploitation that goes on. And what I find very hypocritical is it is lawyers who have stood with teachers, with Sosion and the likes when they went to fight for pay. It is lawyers who are the reason why interns, doctors, interns who have gone through university for the same amount of the same duration as I have, right now earn a net of 155,000 shillings, for which they were still demonstrating, saying it was too little. These are interns. So I'm trying to get the reason behind, just because we do appreciate the fact that times were different. Our fathers walked kilometers to school. That is true. But right now, we do have the SGR. We do have matatus. It does not mean I have to walk to school. We have our own challenges that are different and unique to our generation, and things that we do go through that you did not, the older generation not necessarily did not go through and fail to appreciate. So we do not have, just because your generation had a set of challenges, doesn't mean we have to go through that set of challenges in the guise of trusting the process. You're earning more money now than your pupil masters and in the years before. So what we are asking is not to pay us as equivalent, salary equivalent of advocates, but compensate the work we do. If you do pay an intern less than the suit you wear, and you expect the intern to be as sharply dressed as you are, where are they supposed to get this amount of money? You expect the intern to be at the office at 5 a.m., 6 a.m. That is not the issue, but that is peak hours. The transport is high. They have to be there somehow. Just dignity.
All right,
thank you. Is what we request.
Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Aaron. Nyanje, you are out of order. Sorry, guys. Sorry. We can save that for later. Please, let's have responses to the previous questions.
Yeah, just so apprenticeship and interns.
Please.
Apprentices and interns.
Please, yes. Yeah, so let's have the questions answered. For the question for Mutembei and Ms. Musao, who's going to respond? Okay, we can pass the microphone to Shem then. Sorry, I'm calling him the wrong name. Please pass the microphone to him. The guy, yeah. There you go. Please respond to the question you were asked. Go ahead, Shem, please.
Oh, thank you. It's now working. All right. About the militarization of, the military takeover of KEMSA. First of all, I'd like to say about my research. In fact, it is Mr. Getanda and Ms. Belinda who have provided a lot of knowledge for my research. So thank you, sir. About militarization of, the military takeover of KEMSA. First of all, as a lawyer, I am not for a military doing the civil work because we all know the consequences of militarization of the public sector. We know Egypt and Sudan, and you know when you give the military, the more the access you give it to the public sector, we are then prone to coups, right? And instability from the military. On the other hand, about the military, the question now we must ask ourselves, why did the president come to this situation? It's because one, we are corrupt. That is the one problem. As Kenyans, we are corrupt, and that's the problem we have in KEMSA. And then another thing about the reason why there's a military takeover is because of politics. You know, the president is in his last year of the term, and people take him as a lame duck. And so he's using the military whom he can command to do something. I think that's the reason. But had we had, I think we have genuine people who could have done better job, but I don't know why. All right, and I don't know where they are because you saw we have, I hope I had passed through KEMSA when we had COVID. Na mimi nipate at least 300 million. That's how people wish in the Kenyan thinking. All right. About statutory deductions, Mr. Getanda asked, we have an institution that is in debt, and what is the way forward? How do you deal with that? You know, there's an amendment in Parliament currently on this issue of deductions, failure to remit deductions, and it is going to come up with fines for failure to remit deductions, and I think it is a way of deterrence, really, I think, going forward. But really, it's true that especially universities in Kenya are struggling with billions of debt. Even the KRA, they have not paid. I don't know how it's going to be. Another issue about mandatory payments. So if you were to be an actuary, if I were to be an actuary, not as a lawyer, we have to think of sustainability because now we have only 8 million people out of 40 who are contributing to NHIF, which is not sustainable. What is the way forward? It is either we have a way of maximum people enrolled in NHIF, which is either we have it mandatory or we tax people. We tax people instead of using NHIF so they can get the health insurance fund, which is not possible now because there's a huge tax bill on people. So the way forward will have to be mandatory. Otherwise, it will not be sustainable. And then the inside of NHIF. It is true that the problem with NHIF we have is the rich contribute the same amount with the poor, and then it is the rich mostly who use this insurance to go out of the country to get treatment, especially our members of parliament and other influential people. And let's not be political here, but one thing that I liked about the deputy president that when he was talking about NHIF, he said if he gets in, he will ensure people pay NHIF according to what they earn. Because him is also paying, I don't know, 5,000 or 10,000 as a deputy president. And yet he's also getting total insurance from there, like a common man too. So we have to consider this so that we have to look at it. And then another thing about the problem with NHIF Ukondani, there's really total mismanagement, like parastatals. It is mismanagement. People are just put there for the work of not managing properly, but eating. For example, do you know the story? Have you ever read in newspaper that there was a clerk in NHIF, just a clerk, who takes a helicopter from his home to NHIF and back? He is not using car. Why are you not using a car? Because there's traffic. I can't use. So that's the situation we are in. And my brother asked the question about equality. It's progressive, but really we have to ensure the poor access to health. And I think my suggestions are the ones that I have that we could make a way of making it affordable to everyone. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Shem. Wahu, do you want to say anything based on what was raised about your presentation?
Nyanje. Okay, I think when you were asking about intergenerational equity, you meant the abstract conflict that exists between the old generation and us as youth, and whether that can be bridged, right? And what if it isn't bridged? Whether we'll ever attain climate justice? What if it works? Because it gives us an opportunity. These principles that we are applying in order to attain climate justice are providing us with an opportunity to either snap back or bounce back or go back to normalcy or change our thinking, bounce forward, rethink positively. And if it doesn't work, this generation, the youthful generation, has properly been influenced with regards to climate justice and the importance of environmental protection. And as we grow old, I believe this gap that exists will be merged with the coming future generations. And maybe if Susan Yara can add to that question, probably she has a better answer. Also, the guy who asked me about whether the world is coming to an end, I don't know for sure. But yeah, a lot of climate activists are telling us to act like our houses are on fire, because they are. And if the world doesn't end because Jesus has come back as a thief, maybe climate change is what will cause that. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Wahu. Mutembe? It's behind.
Yeah, let me respond to the question that was posed about connection of funding to COVID-19. I think even though there was mismanagement of grants given due to COVID-19, that was just a subset. That was just one aspect. And corruption has always been constant anyway. That notwithstanding, COVID-19 has had drastic effects in all spheres of life. Maybe just to give you an example, in the current budget that was read out in June this year, the government allocated around 14 billion for immunity, for boosting immunity through vaccines. That was in addition to about 7 billion that was spent in the previous budget. Then, due to social effects of COVID-19, around 21 billion was allocated to the economic stimulus program. The government had to reduce taxation. VAT was reduced from 16% to 14%. Corporate tax was